Some people have wondered whether the great ship of Western culture is sinking. Personally, I believe it is sinking, overweighted with too much technology and buffeted by stormy seas and winds from the third world. What relationship does the workshop have to this uncertain future? I think it has a lot of relationship. I think individuals in the workshop are preparing themselves for life, for survival in this future uncertain world. They're preparing themselves by becoming more clear inside themselves as to who they are and what their inner strengths and capacities are. They're preparing themselves by learning to live cooperatively, not competitively, not power-seeking. They're really getting ready to survive. They're preparing themselves. They're preparing themselves to face each uncertain moment. That happens in the workshop. It's going to happen as they leave the workshop. It's a good preparation for life in a world where no one knows what's going to happen. So I think that the workshop itself is preparation for living in the future world of which we know so little. I want to speak of a few of the things that I observed personally. I arrived in the middle of the workshop. The very first evening I met with the staff of facilitators. I knew some of them. They greeted me very warmly. They were delighted I was here. It was an extremely warm welcome. And then one woman spoke up saying, "I don't know you. I don't know whether I'll like you or not. You're a stranger to me. I don't feel anything against you, but I don't know you as yet. I welcome the chance to get acquainted with you." Well, that sort of honesty was the kind of thing that really made a great impression on me. She had gone inside herself to look at her own feelings. She realized she didn't feel a very warm welcome because she didn't know me, and she had been open enough to express it. Now, this is the kind of thing that permeated the staff and the workshop. The tendency to really look inside and ask, yes, but what is it that I'm really feeling at this moment? And then to express that feeling. And that to me is a very great advantage of the workshop experience. I had a conversation with a man that impressed me a great deal. He had been very silent in the group. I had never heard him speak up. But it turned out that he had been for 28 years in the military service. He left as a high-ranking officer. His was a world of competition and power and achievement. Then his wife came to the Arcozelo workshop last year, and he began to get glimpses of some other world, of a different world than the world he had lived in. And it intrigued him, and he came here this year. He said that this had been the most significant and changing experience in his life. He'd begun to enter this new world where human values were uppermost, not competition and power, and where he began to rediscover himself. He rediscovered the child in himself, and that child could walk on the earth, but also could fly high in the skies. I was very impressed that here was a man who for years and years had lived a life of rigid constriction, and yet who in the workshop had enormously changed to realize some of the humanity within himself, some of the child within himself. And we asked him, why had he never spoken up in the meeting? Well, a lot was going on inside that was sufficient. And to me, that was another example of the kind of change that takes place in the workshop. I have a very clear memory of the three faces that I saw on one man. I saw him first in an evening meeting on sexuality and homosexuality. He was rigid, he was narrow, he was bigoted, he was authoritarian. The next morning in the community meeting, he began to open up as a person who was full of religious doubts. He didn't know what the base of his life was. He was really a searching person, trying to find some new truth around which he could build his life. It was just a totally different picture of it. And then the third face of his that I saw was the next morning at the community meeting, after he'd heard some others speak. He said with a good deal of force, "I realize I've been doing a lot of things that I don't like to do. I've been doing them just because of the expectations of others and the expectations I place on myself. And from here on, I'm going to do a lot more of what I want to do." And somehow, I just felt he'd gone through a tremendous change in the very short time that I had seen him. There was a 12-year-old boy at the workshop who interested me a great deal. He seemed perceptive, helpful, full of life, a very shrewd judge of human nature. So I was interested to hear the story of that boy. He had been a great problem to the workshop at the beginning of the workshop. Some people had thought he was homicidal, that he was dangerous, he was a delinquent. He had caused a good deal of trouble. And then some people from the workshop went to him and talked with him. They told him what was not acceptable, what people didn't like. They also asked him, "What do you need?" And he told them all the things he would like to get. He'd like to learn to paint. He'd like to learn to dance. He'd like to take part in the activities of the workshop. And so he was incorporated into the workshop. And from that time on, he became a real member of the workshop in every way. And to me, that was very significant, because here was someone who was outside of the workshop, and yet who, when dealt with the kind of attitudes which pervaded the workshop, when he was met with understanding and caring and treated as a person, he responded in a beautiful way and became a very positive member of the group and a very positive part of all that was going on. When I first came to the workshop, one woman was acting very strangely. She was wandering around the grounds all alone. When she spoke, she was not coherent. Then she was found all alone in front of the mirrors in the dance room without any clothing on. She was clearly crazy by any outside standards. But people respected her. They respected her aloneness. They treated her as a person. They even respected her desire to stand in front of the mirrors naked. And at the last meeting of the workshop, she was calm and possessed. At the last meeting of the workshop, she was calm and self-possessed, and she told of what this experience had meant to her. That she had re-examined her whole life. She named the people who had been of help to her. She said, and I could readily believe it, that she was leaving the workshop a much stronger, a much more integrated person than when she arrived. So that brings up the whole question of what is craziness? In my view, craziness often results when a very sensitive person finds a world in which there is no understanding. When no one understands, then one becomes more and more withdrawn. There is no chance of communication. You feel totally alienated, and so you become crazy. I've had an experience like that myself, and I know how much love and understanding can help. Love and understanding and a chance to be alone. How much those things can help in gradually returning to a more normal view of the world and to a better integrated kind of behavior. So to me, this was a very confirming experience to find that by respecting her as a person, this woman was able to go through a clearly psychotic episode, but come out of it stronger and better than when she entered. One thing that was talked about in this workshop, and that is talked about in every workshop, is the anxiety and the fear that people feel about going back to what they call the real world. To me, the workshop is the real world, and outside is an artificial world that we've created. But I can understand their anxiety. They're going to find that people don't understand them. They're going to find sometimes a great letdown in feelings. They're not sure how they can begin to live in this new way that they've discovered in the workshop. There's reason for anxiety. There's no one answer to that. Some people are going to have to compromise with the institutions they are working in. Others are going to be able to take steps toward living a new kind of life. One of the things that impressed me greatly was a little talk that Teresa gave. She came 2 years ago to a workshop in the United States. She was a frightened little rabbit. She had never done anything on her own before. She was afraid of speaking. She was afraid of life. She was afraid of everything. She found a good deal of strength in that workshop. She went back and did some things in her own home community, began to gather a group around her, began to interest her students in this kind of experience. And last year she came to Arcozelo with a number of these students and friends of hers from her hometown. Now she could go back with a support group. She had people she could talk to who understood her, who understood the experience she had been through. Now she comes to the workshop this year. She's a strong professional woman who is carrying out all kinds of important activities in her home community. She has found a new life for herself. She's living in a new way. To me, it was a 2-year record of change and of really growth that was very of extreme interest to the whole community as she told her story. And I don't know that every person will go through as satisfying a degree of change, but nevertheless her story had a great deal of meaning to me and to the whole workshop. One of the things that happens in a workshop is the building of a community. And I think that comes about through changes in persons and then through changes in the group. And I want to try to tell of some of those changes as I observe them. In the first place, in the community meetings, people express all the different facets of themselves. I've seen petty irritation. The community isn't responsible. They don't clean things up. I've seen anger. One person storming out of the meeting, very angry. I've seen shouting matches where people confront each other with real dislike and anger. I've seen warmth. I think of one time when Maureen spoke, a woman rushed across the circle and hugged her. I thought she would crack her rib. She was expressing the admiration and the love that she felt for Maureen. Then there's distrust. One man said he distrusted the group so he would never tell them of any more experiences. There's confusion. People who find they can't sleep at night because they're experiencing so many conflicting attitudes. Then you find tenderness and compassion and caring for each other. You find fear of what's going on inside, fear of what they'll meet later. Pretty soon people have expressed all the different aspects of themselves, and they find that others accept that anger, that fear, that confusion, that love. Then they can begin to accept that in themselves. They find themselves accepting themselves as diverse persons with all kinds of attitudes and all kinds of feelings. And once that happens, a person can be more of a real person. He is able to choose the behaviors that he will show in a new situation. He discovers his own inner strength. He discovers his capacities. And so he becomes a much more independent, vital, real human being. Then, that lays the basis for a sound community, because real persons can relate together in order to accomplish real tasks. And so a community becomes stronger as people feel, I can trust you because I know all aspects of you. I don't just know your good side, I know your bad side too. And I like all of you. And so out of that begin to come the webs of a really strong community, a network that will last beyond the workshop itself. And this growth of a strong community spirit is something that I think, too, has implications for the future. It has implications for our survival. It gives people strength as they face the future. So this building of a community is a very important feature of this workshop, and in my experience, of every workshop. One thing I realized very keenly is that this was not one workshop, it was 90 workshops. Every person who experiences the workshop experiences it in a different way. 90 people could give you 90 different pictures of what went on here. I've just tried to give you a little bit of what I saw, of what I experienced. So I asked myself, did I get what I came for myself personally? I think the answer is no and yes. Because I was not involved in the whole workshop, it didn't touch me as much personally as some other experiences have. I wasn't involved in a small encounter group. It didn't change me inwardly in any great degree. Yet in another sense, I found very much what I wanted when I came to the workshop. We had planted some seeds last year in the workshop here at Arcozelo. I came to see if it was possible that those seeds could be growing, that they would be taking on a Brazilian character, not an American character. And I found the answer to that was a very positive one. I found that people had taken off from their experience last year. They had grown, they were developing. They were putting on a workshop which was more Brazilian in character than the one we had last year. It makes me very happy to see that some of the seeds we planted are growing into strong Brazilian plants and are being nurtured and cared for and propagated by Brazilians. And I think that that shows that this is not just one simple phenomenon, but it's going to change and grow and spread throughout this country, just as it is spreading now throughout the world. I sometimes dream dreams too that people all over the world will hear things like your experience and like my books. But I feel that that doesn't come about by trying to sell things. I try to express what's in me, just as you've tried to express what's in you, and that's what touches people.